Welcome to She Sells Radio. Now, I just have to share one of the biggest inspirations for me when I created the She Sells brand several years ago was that I disagreed so much with how traditional sales strategy was taught. And everything from, the stuff that feels gross, right? The hard close to impersonal cold outreach strategies to spray and pray. It just felt so wrong to me. And I knew it felt wrong to so many of the women who I was working with and mentoring at the time too. And one of the most incredible people and women who I've been privileged to get to know over the past few years, whose work I feel is so aligned with what we believe in the She Sells community, is Brittany Hodak, my guest today. If you're not familiar with Brittany, which you're going to love her and want to dive deep into her world after you hear the conversation today. She's a keynote speaker. She's an author. She's an award-winning entrepreneur. Entrepreneur Magazine calls her the expert at creating loyal fans for your brand. And her new best-selling book, Creating Superfans, is now out, which I'm so excited about. We actually had Brittany on the podcast about a year ago. So you can go check it out on episode 136, and you can go back and kind of dig deeper into some of Brittany's backstory and her superfan methodology. But I'm so excited to have her back and to talk about what's changed in the world of selling and relationship building, even just over the past year, and why creating superfans is even more critical than ever today. So Brittany, it is so good to have you back. Welcome to She Sells Radio.
Yay. Thank you, Elise. I am so excited to be back here with you.
Oh my gosh. And please do. I say this with all intention. Go back and listen to episode 136 for background on Brittany and probably my favorite, we were just talking about it before we recorded, but my favorite podcast, podcast bombing by
your podcast crashers.
It's the best. I just adore this woman. I adore your family. Okay. So if someone is not yet familiar with you, Brittany, I want to give just a quick backstory. So in your book, you tell the story of how this first Matchbox 20 concert inspired your career of building and later selling this entertainment company, and your clients of that company included Dolly Parton, Kiss, Taylor Swift, Luke Bryan, Katy Perry, and more. So you were working with big names. And you talk about how it was all inspired by this first Matchbox 20 concert. So what was it about the magic of that concert that kind of changed your life and took you down the path that you're now on today?
So I grew up in a really small town in Oklahoma, and I was always fascinated with the entertainment industry. I was fascinated with music. And the first time I went to a live concert, I was like, I've got to work in the entertainment industry. I have to do this. So when I was 16 years old, I went to job shadow at my local radio station, and I begged for any job. And they said, you look like you're about the right size for the mascot costume. And I said, great, I'll do it. And so I worked as Sting the Bee, and I got to wear this giant bee costume to every car dealership sale and rodeo and furniture store grand opening for a 50-mile radius. And about 6 months after I started at the station, I had the good fortune that because my maiden name was Jones, and because the movie Bridget Jones' Diary was coming out, the promotions manager said, we've got a Brittany Jones. We should do something. What could we do and call it your diary? And I said, well, you're always talking about trying to drive more traffic to the station website. What if I just interviewed all the bands that came to town, and that could be my diary? And she said, oh, like that other movie, that Almost Famous movie. Yeah, people are talking about that. That has a lot of Oscar buzz. Let's do that. Do you know HTML? And I was like, of course I know HTML. And I, tried to remember all those letters so I could write it down on my hand later and go home and figure out what it was. But this was in probably the year 2000 or 2001. I was 16 or 17 years old, and all of a sudden it became my job literally to hang out with rock stars and brag about it on the internet. So anytime an artist was playing nearby, I would go hang out with them, review the concert, take pictures with them. And that sort of spoiled any chances of me ever getting a real job, but it also made me fascinated with the idea of fandom and why some artists, would start out small and go on to become the biggest groups and the biggest artists in the world. And others who I thought were just amazing would sort of fade into obscurity. And so I started to really study fandom and what that means for identity and what that means for marketing. And over the years, I worked for several record labels and marketing companies in New York. I launched my own agency, as you said, that went on to do a lot of really cool things and, became an 8-figure business that I exited. And I've just never stopped thinking about this idea of creating Superfans and how you do it and what it means and how anyone, regardless of what it is that you're selling, regardless of the industry that you're in, can use these same tactics and principles to go from a potential commodity provider in the minds of your prospects or your customers to a category of one, to that person that they say, I want to work with her at the exclusion of everybody else because she's my person.
Which it seems to me, and you can, kind of give me your perspective on this, but it's like when you are that category of one, when you've become that, all the other things they're less necessary, right? Like all the things I kind of mentioned in the intro that we're taught we have to do to be successful in sales and in business. When you're that category of one, you're drawing people to you, right? Like it's a totally different dynamic. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. You get leads that are more qualified. They'll close more quickly. They're ready to buy because they don't want to work with someone who does what you do. They want to work with you. And we're living in an experience economy right now, which means it's not really about the products or the services that you sell. It's about the experience. It's about what it feels like to do business with you. How does it feel? How do people feel when they're engaging with you before, during, and after that sales cycle? And so really being intentional about creating that journey, creating that customer experience from before someone ever picks up the phone and talks to you all the way through someone who's been a customer of yours for years and is hopefully sending lots of qualified referrals your way.
I love that. And this is something you say in your book as well, that regardless of what business you're in, everyone today is in the experience business. That may be roughly paraphrased, but hopefully
that was very good. That was a very good paraphrase, if not word for word, but it's true because, I think one mistake that a lot of salespeople make is they think that the sales cycle starts the first time they talk to a prospect, but we know that maybe as much as 2/3 of the buyer's journey is happening before they ever talk to you. People forget to sell the way they buy. And, when we're buying something, we don't just cold call someone for the first part of information. What do? We do our research. We ask our friends. We see what people are saying socially. We look for social proof and things like reviews and recommendations. So by the time you're talking to a prospect, they already know a whole lot about you. But what you don't maybe think about is how many people you've lost along the way because they saw something at some point before they talked to you that made them look for another provider. So really figuring out that like top of funnel, figuring out how to intentionally craft that experience to take someone on that journey before you even know who they are. So that, again, you're not giving them an excuse to say, oh, this person isn't right, this community isn't right, this product isn't right, this service isn't right, and going to look for another solution.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, for sure. I want to ask, this is a very selfish question, but my hope is that it also, and my thought is it's going to benefit a lot of our listeners as well. So I want to speak a little bit more to just this process of optimizing and looking at experience from start to finish for your clients. And as we record this is just like a little bit of the behind the scenes in the She Sells world. This is one of my biggest initiatives right now for us as a company, because we grew so fast. And it was very much a process of like, okay, it was kind of like putting out fires, right? Like what needs to happen here and how are we going to connect with customers here and how are we going to onboard people best? But it happened so fast that I know just intuitively. And I also know sometimes when I go through our own funnels and process, I'm like, oh, that's not exactly the experience I want to give. Or there's just a lot that we're working on improving right now. Not to say that there's not, I think some things we've done really well. And I feel very good about that, but I really want to elevate it. And so I think someone may be listening and maybe they're in the same space where it's like, either they grew really fast and it wasn't a super intentional customer experience journey from start to finish because maybe they were a solopreneur and they grew really fast. And now they're like, okay, it's time to tighten this up. Or maybe they just haven't thought about it in a while, right? How can we elevate this? What are some things that we can be doing and we should be looking at? Like, I hope this question is making sense. What are some things we should be doing and looking at from the start to help elevate that customer experience?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And you're right. There's so many people who don't think about it for exactly the reasons that you articulated, or that by the time they think about it, they're like, well, I don't know where to start because I've got hundreds or maybe thousands of customers at all of these different intervals. And there are some people who bought from me 2 years ago that I haven't followed up with because I'd been meaning to start an email list and just never got around to it. So I think really the place to start is to ask yourself, what is the experience you want customers to have? And a way to make that less overwhelming is to say, if someone were going to tell a friend about you, what would you want them to say? What is the experience of working with you? How do you make people feel? What is your superpower? What is it that you're doing better than anybody else? And once you begin to articulate those things, then you can ask yourself, okay, how do I make this reality? Like, how do I make this become evident to people? If I want people to say that I am thoughtful, how am I showing my customers that I'm thoughtful? How am I doing that? Again, before, during, and after their first purchase, before, during, and after their next purchase. Like, how am I showing them that this is how I'm different from potential competitors out there? So think about what you would want somebody to say to a friend, because that's really your reputation. And it's more than your reputation, it's your brand. Like I talk about in the book, we are far past the days where your brand is what you say it is. Like, your brand is not your logo. It's not the copy on your website. Your brand is what your customers say about you to others. That is your brand. So in crafting an intentional experience, you really want to think about every single touch point that you have with somebody. And you're not going to be able to make all of them magic. But if you're strategic, what you can do is figure out the ones that have the potential to have an outsized impact and design them in a way to where you know that when somebody gets that interaction, it's going to be a wow. It's going to be a moment that matters. It's going to touch them when they get that handwritten card in the mail, or when they get that gift that you've picked out and curated just for them, or when they get that phone call on their birthday for you calling to tell them you hope they have a great day. Figure out what those touch points are that you can easily scale and replicate.
That's so interesting. And I love how you put that, the outsized impact, right? Because if you're like me, you start thinking about this and you're like, oh, we can do this and that and this and that. And then all of a sudden it becomes this kind of beast of, we've got 10,000 ideas of things we want to implement because it all sounds good. And because I know that if someone's listening to this, like, they love their customers, they care about them. They want to make that impact. And we want to think about I love how you put it, the most outsized impact. How do is that just kind of intuitively we think about that? Or so what are some ways to think about what will have the greatest impact for our clients?
So the answer is going to be different for every business. So in my book, Creating Superfans, I talk about something called the supermodel. And I know I talked about this the last time we spoke, so they can go back and listen to that old episode. But just very quickly, the supermodel is start with your story, understand your customer story, personalize, exceed expectations, repeat. And I always say that a super fan is created at the intersection of your story and every customer story, where those worlds collide, where you show someone how your thing is so relevant to their thing that they would never dream of working with another service provider. So the way that you start is by figuring out what are those things that are important? What are the things that connect your story to your customer story? And again, the answer is going to be different for everyone because your superpower is going to be different from all of your competitors' superpowers. That's what makes you, you. So thinking about ways that you can shine a light on that uniqueness in a way that's meaningful to your customers, but also in a way that's really repeatable. So for me and my brand, I like to make people smile. I like to give them something that makes them smile or laugh when they're not expecting it. So, Elise, I know you texted me about the cards that I send out probably like once every 6 weeks or so. And I've got a few hundred people on my mailing list. It's like a physical mailing list that every now and then they get a funny card in the mail. And sometimes it's around a holiday, like the ones I just recently sent out. And sometimes it's for no reason at all. And then I also send out personal cards on people's birthdays. But the reason I'm doing that is because I wanted a way to stay in touch with people that wasn't like me having to physically write out a note to everyone. So even though it's not a handwritten card, it still feels funny and personal. At least I would imagine that it does, because that's the feedback that I get from all of my customers. And it takes me not that long. Alex on my team, who's amazing, helps me execute that. But like, we've got the list. We use a website called Postable, so everybody's there already. We just pick a funny card, like write a cute saying, personalize it to everyone's first name, and send it out every few weeks just to let people know that we're thinking about them.
I love that. I love that. So it's thinking about like, what's in alignment with your brand, right? So, cause you are all about humor, like funny. That's when I think about you. I think about some of those things. Like, you always make me laugh. You always make me smile. It's different. It stands out. So it's that uniqueness in alignment with your brand, along with what's going to be different and stand out from everybody else in the space, and what's going to be most impactful to my customers.
Yeah. And so I've got a lot of realtor clients who do things like making custom puzzles for every one of their clients as a closing gift. And they'll take the listing photo from the house and turn it into a puzzle, or they'll take a picture of the family standing in front of the house and make it into a puzzle. So for them, the process is the same every single time. They're using the app on their phone. You can print a puzzle for like $20 at every Walgreens and CVS in America. They're ready in an hour. But to the recipient, it feels really special and personal because it's their photo. So doing things like that, where you're taking advantage of personalization and customization, but you're still able to put a system behind it to where for you, it just takes a few minutes, but for your client, it feels like this really special gift because it's something they probably wouldn't have done on their own.
Love that. I love that. And I'm glad you mentioned that you go through the super framework in really great detail on episode 136, because that's kind of the crux of all of this, right? That's really the foundation of your work. So I would say to someone, go buy the book and listen to that episode for more context. I'm really curious now. So as we record this, we're about a year out from when we had that initial conversation. And I know you've been deep in the trenches of writing your book and also doing a lot of work with really major organizations, helping them from a customer experience standpoint, from a sales standpoint. So what is different now than a year ago when we were talking? I really want to talk about why, like kind of how you've seen the landscape shift in business, why this is probably more important than ever. I'd love to hear some of your updated insights from when we were speaking a year ago.
Yeah, well, obviously the world has changed so much in the past, let's say 3 years since COVID, and continues to change. And I think one thing in the past year that's become really heightened in the sort of societal awareness is the idea that employee happiness is so critical to your brand, because your customer experience will never be better than your employee experience. It can't. It's impossible. Your employees are your brand. The interactions that they're having with your customers are your brand. So it's critically important to hire people who are in alignment with what you want your brand to be, to train them and give them the resources that they need. And most importantly, to trust them to deliver the kind of experiences that you have designed. So one thing that I think is really fascinating is, like, it's not a question of whether there will be a customer experience or not. There is. In every single interaction with every transaction that happens everywhere in the world, whether it's B2B, B2C, a few pennies, a few $1 trillion, there is a customer experience. The question is it one that's intentional, that has been designed, that has been planned, that has been carefully curated for maximum impact? Or is it one that's accidental, that's just sort of haphazard? And a lot of times what happens as companies grow and don't pay attention to that is they have these accidental experiences. There's a lot of variation based on, let's say, the employee that they're working with, or the location that they go to, or the time of day, or the channel that they're using. And creating an intentional customer experience is about controlling for those variables, saying this is the goal, and maybe we'll fall short sometimes, but this is what we're going for. And this is how we're training everyone to think about what it is that we want to deliver. Because if you don't do that, if you haven't taken the time to actually like codify the things that matter and say, here's what we're doing, and here's how they matter, and here's what your role in it looks like, your employees could be out there like trying their best. They just haven't really been given the direction to like all row the same way.
Gosh, that's powerful. Yeah, that's super powerful. And it's something that I think for kind of going back to the conversation we had earlier about how do you design that experience. I think in my case, I kind of shared with you what we're doing behind the scenes. And then also for a lot of our listeners too, it's like, you want people to have an amazing experience, right? That's, of course you do. You care very deeply about your clients, and it's how to prioritize that along with everything else that you're doing. Right. And sometimes when you're in that rapid growth phase, you got to stop and pause and say, okay, we got to get that client experience. Like this has to be number one focus right now before we scale and grow even more. And I would imagine from where you're sitting, it's like from day one, right? We want to be looking at things and analyzing through that lens.
Yeah, it's from day one. And it's something that never ends. The R of the supermodel is repeat. And that's because client experience or customer experience is not a set it and forget it. It's not like a write a funnel and call it a day. You're constantly iterating. You're constantly measuring and monitoring and redoing. And part of the reason why is because everything is experience, every touch point, every interaction. I lost an argument with my husband a few months ago about this paint store. It's a Sherwin-Williams store that's like a mile from our house. And we were painting the bathroom, and I said, oh, I'm going to drive to Home Depot and like pick out paint. And he said, why would you drive all the way to Home Depot, which is like 20 minutes away, when there's a Sherwin-Williams store like half a mile from our house? And I said, babe, that store's been closed for like a year. They never reopened after COVID. And I was like, Britt, no, I drive by it every day. They're open. And I was like, no, they're out of business. And I got in the car and drove there thinking that I was going to be able to come home all victorious. Like I was right, but the store was open. But the reason I thought they weren't is because the outside of the building looked terrible. Like there is not a building in all of downtown Franklin where I live that was in more need of being repainted than this paint store. And the sign out in front of their store looked like it was 30 years old. And I was like, you have one job. Like you're a store that sells paint and you can't paint your own building. You can't update your own sign. Like I'm not going to buy paint here. So that's obviously like a funny example, but the same is true of everything, right? Like everything is experience. Every interaction is saying something to your customers. I switched vets recently because the voicemail at my vet was when you had to like call to go through this phone tree before you can make an appointment. There's not like online appointment. It literally said, hello, thank you for calling. For hours and directions, press 1. For prescription refills, press 2. For cremation and euthanasia, press 3. For everything else, including appointments, press 4. And I was like, what? And so then of course there's like all these questions in my head, right? Of like, how many pets are they having to euthanize? And like, who approved that phone tree menu? Because it was read in this like beautiful British accent by somebody that I know doesn't work at the clinic because I know everybody there. And then I started thinking, well, did the vet hear this and think it was a good idea? Because that's like a serious concern for me about her judgment. Or did she like not listen to it and she doesn't think it's a big deal that the message that every single person who calls to make an appointment hears? See, like that's also a bad option. So again, everything is experience. Every touch point is saying something to your prospects and customers, whether you know it or not. So you really need to try to walk a mile in their shoes, talk to them, understand what the experience is from the outside looking in so that you can curate it from the inside out.
Yeah. Brilliant. I want to speak a little bit here before we direct everyone on where they can go to get your book, about your own personal journey and experience. And this is something that I was just having a conversation with a client a couple hours ago before recording this, about why she decided to join the She Sells community and what kind of spoke to her. And she said, it was that I had, because it's still very much a personal brand at the time of this recording, although we're also looking to expand beyond just the Elise brand. She was like, I had seen you decide that you were done playing small. And I felt so much in my own life like I needed to do that in my own way. And I know that that's the case for a lot of the members of our community, that they have a big vision, they have a big dream, whether it's they want to just, crush it, not just whether it's they want to crush it at their corporate job, they want to get a promotion, they want to make more money, they want to either launch their own business or scale their business to 7-8 figures. So much of your personal story has been about like really putting yourself out there and betting on yourself. I want to speak to that for a moment, because I think that is such a critical decision we have to make, whether we're in sales, whether we're an entrepreneur, is that belief in ourselves to go out and trust our instincts, bet on ourselves, put our name in the hat. What has your experience been like there? And how have you learned to consistently bet on yourself? I mean, even with writing this book, right, and putting it out, it's like you're betting on yourself over and over again. How have you learned to do that?
Well, thank you for asking. And I always say, you have to be willing to bet on yourself. Like, if you're not going to bet on you, who is going to bet on you? And before you can create super fans, you really have to be a super fan of yourself. And what I've found is that, you know, if I'm going to go all in on something, it helps for me to be all in, like, from day one, and really betting on myself to say, no, I'm going to spend the money on this. I'm going to spend the resources on this, because it's really not fair to ask other people to be more serious about something than you are, or more committed to something than you are. And I think this is something I see a lot of times where people are like, oh, I'm going to just dip my toe in a little bit, and this is my side hustle. And you're asking somebody to give their energy or their money or their time to this thing that you're giving like 5% of your attention to. So why should they take it more seriously than you are? And so whether it's with your resources, whether it's with your time, whether it's with just, you know, the intentionality of your thought and your spirit, I think going all in on the things that matter is, at least for me, like the only way I know to be successful. Like, I don't know how to be successful doing something small.
Wow. Wow. I think that's kind of a great way to sum up what it is to create super fans, right? And to embed that in your culture. So that's super powerful. Um, Tell us, Brittany, so if someone, obviously people are going to want to go read your book, connect with you further. What's the best way to get your book, Creating Super Fans, and then to connect with you beyond here?
Well, thank you. People can connect with me at brittanyhodak.com, and they can get my book everywhere books are sold. So it's available in stores. It's available online. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and you want to check out the audiobook version, you can certainly do that. You can also get it as a beautiful full color hardcover, which I think is Elisa's favorite version, or you can get it for your Kindle. So however you want it, it is there, because I'm all about making it easy for the customer.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And the book is beautiful. So yeah, I highly recommend. I know we actually just surveyed our audience recently to say, are you an audiobook or a paper copy book? And pretty much everyone was like, I want the real thing. I want the hard copy of the book. And your book is gorgeous and so beautifully designed. And I think just even kind of seeing the presentation and how you do things will inspire someone to think about, how can we just make that instant wow factor with our first impression with our clients. So
Thank you. That was the intention. I was like, I wanted the book to showcase the fact that you can turn anything into an experience, even a business book. So this is a business book that everybody has said, it doesn't feel like I'm reading a business book. Like, I can't believe at the end how much I've learned, because I've just been like laughing the whole time. And then I realized that I've changed the way that I think about my team or my sales process or my customers. And so that was really my intention. So thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're leading a sales team, whether you're an individual contributor in sales, you're going to pick up so many things here that will really help you become that category of one, which I just love the positioning there. And I think for all of us, that really is our goal. So go get Brittany's book, Creating Superfans. I'm so glad you have a book out in the world. It is so needed. And just your heart and your wisdom and your brilliance shine through. And I really, really appreciate your time on the show today.
Oh, well, thank you, my friend. And thank you for having me back. And hopefully I'll get to see you and give you a great big hug in person soon.
I would love that. I would love that. All right. To you, my listener, again, you know where to connect with Brittany and get her book. Go get her book. Thank you so much for being a listener of She Sells Radio. And we will see you on our next episode. Bye for now.